The Lincoln Continental was released last year, and I immediately, of course, got out to test it and to check it out, to make a little video about it and this, that, and other. Now, prior to last year, I actually saw the Continental at the New York International Auto Show. And since I made a video of the 2016 International Auto Show, it appears in the video. Unfortunately, you weren't allowed to get in it at the time. It was locked. It was on the showroom floor, but it was locked. So now, after only 18 months, apparently Ford is considering canceling the Lincoln Continental. Now, when I first reviewed this car, and I called it an unprofessional review because as far as I'm concerned, I'm not a professional. As far as I'm concerned, the majority of the professional reviewers aren't professionals. What they are people who get paid for clicks and views, just like I do here on YouTube. These people don't purchase these cars. These people don't live with these cars on a daily basis. They just drive them, and they basically can only speak about initial reliability, and perhaps they might be able to say a little bit about drive quality and this, that, and other. But these people don't actually live with these cars. See, the one thing about it is, as many cars as I've actually purchased, I can actually speak to living with these cars. I can speak to ownership of certain cars, especially SRT models and a couple of Mercedes-Benz. So when I talk about the Lincoln, the only thing I can really talk about is my initial feel and my initial emotions about it, like how I felt about sitting in it and this, that, and other. So what I'm going to say really quickly is that, let's start with the facts. The Lexus GS in the same amount of time last year got 1,009 buyers in America. The Acura RLX, which suffers from the exact same problems that the Lincoln does, which I'm going to talk about in a second, only sold 285. Only 285 units for the Acura RLX. Now, on a side note, I'd also like to point out to the Acura fanboys that the NSX isn't selling. The reason why it's not selling is for the same reason the RLX isn't selling, and also the same reason why the Continental is not selling. The reason why is because it's overpriced, it's underpowered, and the people who talk about how much they want NSX, they're not the ones who can actually afford to buy one. You're talking about the people who can't afford to buy one. The people who can afford to buy an NSX go out and buy a Lamborghini Huracan. They don't buy an Acura NSX. The people who have the money don't buy it. They go out and buy something better, or something that they perceive to be better. Cadillac's XTS, in that same amount of time, sold 3,163 units. Now, that's definitely not as good as the XT5, but that's still 3,163 units. Now, you compare that to the Continental. The Continental, in 18 months, sold 18,846 units. 12,012 of those happened in 2017, because this was 18 months. So in the total amount of time, they've sold a couple, but the problem is they see the sales slowing because this year they've only sold 1,573 units through February. Now, they probably sold a couple since then, but it's obviously not enough to keep the momentum up, which is why, like, when these cars initially come out, most people go out and buy them, so the initial sales usually are strong. After that, the sales start to cool down. Now, the Lincoln Navigator, and especially now that they've reproduced it and they've refreshed it and everything, and they've made it much, much nicer and everything, in only 60 days, the Lincoln Navigator has sold over 2,351. Now, I have to say that even with the Navigator's price, passing $90,000, just like the Escalade, the Navigator's still able to get that kind of money because there's a lot of fleet sales. The Navigator gets fleet sales, the Cadillacs get fleet sales, and then there's a lot of people who have big families and they're big people. That's the important thing, which I'm going to get to in a second. Big people want big cars. They don't want these small-ass cars. Now, the problem with Lincoln is that Lincoln keeps fucking up the exact same way. They keep making their cars too small. What do I mean by too small? Well, in order for you to understand it, you yourself would have to go and you'd have to test its competition first, and then you get into Lincoln, and then you'd see what I'm talking about. The problem is, unless you're taller than about 6 feet, you probably won't notice the lack of space in the Continental as quickly as somebody like me. I'm over 6'6". I notice it right away. Now, a lot of people who have the money have chosen crossovers and SUVs over cars, which is obvious because they need more space. See, it's not enough for you to just say, oh, yeah, well, you got enough space for your kids and you got enough space for your wife and your husband. The problem is, what about the kids' stuff? What about their strollers? What about their toys? What about their bags and all that shit? You got to put all that stuff in the third row. Now, if there's no third row, then you expect to have like a big, massive, spacious trunk. The Lincoln Continental is a good size car for some people, but the problem is for the mass markets, it just doesn't attract the way one of their SUVs does, like the Lincoln MKX or possibly even the Lincoln MKC. The Lincoln MKC has a smallish back seat, but the front seat's decent. SUVs and crossovers trade vertical height for length. Cars give you length. SUVs and crossovers give you vertical height. You can stack more stuff straight up than you can in length because, you still have to be able to park this thing. So in most cases, most of these new SUVs and crossovers are taking up less physical space in a parking spot than most of these quote-unquote big cars. So you've got Hyundai with their G90, even Hyundai with their G80. You've got Lincoln with the Continental. You've got Cadillac with the CT6. And when you move up the scale, you've got Audi with the A8, you got BMW with the 750, and then you got Mercedes with the S-Class. Out of all of these cars, including Rolls-Royce, including Bentley, the Mercedes S-Class is the only one car that actually doesn't compromise anything. It doesn't compromise height because it has a high enough ceiling. It doesn't compromise length because the thing is over like 217 inches long. The thing is huge. If you've never driven one, you don't know what I'm talking about. It has a massive trunk. It's got a massive second row. If you ride around in a Mercedes S-Class for any length of time, you basically are spoiled and you expect everything to try to approach that as a standard. The problem with the Lincoln Continental is the Lincoln Continental just doesn't do that. The Lincoln Continental is not like the Lincolns of old. The Lincolns of old were huge. Even back then when cars were much smaller, the Lincoln Continentals were huge. But as the civilian population has grown in size due to just being taller, due to obesity, whatever, as the cars have attempted to follow the people, Lincoln continues to fall behind. Now, I have to say, if you compare the interior space on the Continental to even a car that hasn't necessarily been redesigned yet, the Cadillac XTS, I would prefer the XTS simply because the XTS has a higher roof. And by having this big, high bubble roof in the XTS, you get so much more space. And because you get so much more space to sit vertically, it's more comfortable for larger people. I also have a problem with the Lincoln MKS, Lincoln MKS and the Continental, because both of them have, as you can see in this video, they have these huge center panels, which make the cockpit of the car seem overly bunkerized. People don't want their knees to have restricted space. Now, if you get into a Mercedes S-Class, you can stretch out in almost every single direction. If you get in a BMW 7 Series, same thing. You can stretch out in every single direction. You can sit straight up. You can lay back. Your knees aren't being forced up against this panel. And that's the problem that I noticed with the Lincoln MKS and the Continental. In fact, it almost feels like the same damn car when I got inside. The back seat wasn't big enough. The headroom wasn't high enough. The front room just wasn't large enough. Now, here's the issue. You may say, oh, yeah, well, we don't want to have our cars so big. We want to have small Volkswagens with manuals and stuff. Yeah, well, guess what? Your manuals are dead. They're not coming back. They're dying simply because most people are forced to choose one car for their family. And because of that, automatics are the new norm. Now, the Lincoln Continental and the Lincoln Navigator both have a good automatic transmission system where you just see these buttons and whatnot. These things are not really for enthusiast drivers. You have to recognize who these things are for. These things are for geriatric old people who are old enough to still remember back in the days when Lincoln had the power that BMW and Mercedes have now. Even right now, I would say that, Lincoln, it's just not as desirable a brand because First of all, the naming strategy on these cars, which fortunately they did decide to change, they changed it and they called this the Continental. Well, thank you. So now I don't have to confuse it with MKS and MKZ and all that. Yes, I love the naming strategy. The problem is when you slap that name on a car, you have to make that car swing for the fences. That Lincoln Continental should have been what the Hyundai G90 is. And it's obviously what Hyundai did was they basically copied the Mercedes LS 460 and they did their best to copy BMW as much as they could. So they said, okay, we're going to make this thing as big as we could possibly make it. And they're basically selling their G90 for basically the exact same cost that this Continental's costing. And I'm pretty sure that Hyundai will move more G80s and more G90s. And I also have to say the G80 is actually very spacious because of its design. It has a huge bubble roof, and it has plenty of leg space in front and in back. Now, most people who are Lincoln fanboys, they don't want to hear that, but I'm going to keep saying, if you don't give the people what they're demanding, then you're going to keep on having these cars fail. The same thing goes for Cadillac. Cadillac, I think, has figured it out. I think they're doubling down on the XT5. They're making the XT4. They're trying to push these crossovers because they know that's where all their sales are coming from. Me personally, if I was going to buy a Cadillac, I think I would get the Cadillac XTS instead of the CT6. Now, if it was a CT6 hybrid with all-wheel drive, yeah, I'd probably get that instead. If I was going to choose between Cadillac or Lincoln, yeah, I'd definitely probably go with Cadillac. I'm not happy with Cadillac's infotainment system. Q is not that great. It's called Q. Lincoln's infotainment system is easier to use. Unfortunately, it's boring. Now, boredom in the infotainment system also isn't really its problem. Its problem is that people get in the car and they don't find that it's big enough for them. Even smaller people want to have big cars. And the reason why is because they psychologically, they want to have road presence. Small women, for instance, are driving these crossovers because they want to have not only road presence, but they also want to not feel like they're being shadowed by these larger crossovers. Like, for instance, if you're in like an MKC or if you're an MKZ, Zephyr or whatever, and you get passed by like a Jeep Grand Cherokee or something, which is not tremendously a huge car because there's a lot of GM cars that are bigger. If you get past one of those things, you're going to feel like you're a dwarf because those things are huge compared to these. So you see a lot of these smaller people trying to get larger cars, and they're trying to have big, spacious cars so that when they go places with their family, they've got a big, spacious car for their family. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that Lincoln's not catering to them. So the bottom line is this. Anybody who criticized me when I talked about the fact that I felt the Lincoln Continental was small, well, I guess at this point you can just eat your words. Because at this point, now you're forced to recognize the fact that the Lincoln Continental is not selling. So you can try to argue, oh, yeah, well, it's not selling because it's not small. It's just selling because it's not fast. People buying cars like this aren't racing other people in traffic. In fact, the majority of these cars are pretty much going to fleet sales. Like you got Uber Black and taxi limousine commercial users. The majority of these cars are fleet sales. But guess what? Even the fleet sales need to have a large car. That's the reason why the Lincoln Navigator and the Cadillac Escalade move so well. It's because when they get these cars on fleet, they know that they can easily get parts for them. They know that they pretty much have decent long-term reliability. The only thing that the Escalade doesn't have is the gas mileage because, you know, these companies, yes, they do want a big torquey V8, but what they don't want is to have horrible fuel economy. Because if you have horrible fuel economy, you're losing a lot of money. You know, so they definitely have to have these big vehicles in order to carry around these people and their luggage. But what they don't want is they don't want the horrible fuel economy. So wherein I used to make fun of Lincoln all the time about only having the hair dryers connected to their V6 and only, you know, they're bragging about how much power they're able to make out of these things. The problem is there's nothing to brag about on paper. And when people are looking and they see, oh, shit, a car's got 500 horsepower, that's, you know, their eyes light up. They're like, holy shit, I want that. But when you're talking this bullshit about like 350 and 4 this and stuff, we're past 4. We were past 4 back when the Hemi 6.1 came out. They were giving you 425 horsepower back in 2006 for less than $50,000. So my thing is, it's not really so much about the power. These people aren't racing these cars. This is not a car to race. This is a car that you're supposed to enjoy as a luxury car. So here's the problem, though. You talk about a luxury car, you got to have more space. And I will say it like this. because I know, there are a lot of these car reviewers who send me emails all the time, and they send it on the down low. Bottom line is this: you need to have models that you can use their body in order to give you a large enough silhouette in that car so that you can design around their bodies. It's funny, the Lamborghini Urus is just hitting the streets now, and the Lamborghini Urus is going to outsell every single last Lamborghini that was ever sold ever before. The Urus is easily going to blow past the Hurricane. It's easily going to blow past the Aventador. Why? Because it's big and it's spacious and you can fit 4 people in it or more. You can fit 5 people in it. Yes, it is just a guzzied up Audi with a Lamborghini badge slapped on it. Bottom line is this: badge equity is a lot to some people buying in this bracket. Anybody who's buying a car over $60,000 or $70,000, they care about that name. So that's one of the reasons why it's hard for companies like Kia to sell their Stinger, and it's hard for them to sell their K900. The K900, by the way, if you've ever tested a Kia K900, I actually like the K900. My problem is it doesn't have all-wheel drive. All-wheel drive at this point is a necessity because you're running into situations where the weather is changing and you got people who definitely probably need it for the winter. Here's the problem, though. Anybody who's going to buy an all-wheel drive vehicle pretty much wants higher ground clearance, so that this way not only do they have their all-wheel drive vehicle, but they also have high ground clearance. And that's the reason why it keeps coming back to crossovers and SUVs. Crossovers and SUVs are killing regular cars. For whatever reason, the industry has decided that they're not going to give you a big, spacious car like an S-Class competitor. They keep on giving you E-Class competitors. Now, I also want to say that the Mercedes E-Class is easily outselling the majority of these cars. The Mercedes E-Class, since last year, it sold 8,411. Now, they sold 8,411 in an amount of time when Acura's RLX could only sell 285. Now, Mercedes E-Class interior is fantastic. The car inside feels more spacious than the Continental because it has, I guess, a higher roof. And the thing about it is that means a lot to certain people who are buying one of these cars, and they're buying them to live with them. I'm sick and tired of watching these professional reviewers, and they drive around the block like once or twice, or they drive around on a back road, and they're like, oh, yeah, well, this is fantastic, blah, 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 blah. The problem is, if you don't live with one of these cars and you don't have to ever have your family come with you somewhere, or you don't ever leave work and suddenly 4 people need a carpool, you don't understand what it means to actually own one of these cars. And if you can't understand what it means to own one of these cars, you wouldn't understand what I'm talking
basically, about. Basically, it puts all those pictures everywhere. So basically, they just drive around any old way, any old direction, and it just maps the entire place. Oh, okay. Yeah, got some Ram trucks.
Oh my God.
So they said bigger, and what else?
They wanted bigger and longer.
You didn't go to the car show, did you? Did you see the blue Navigator? They had a Navigator in a bright blue, and it had gull-wing doors.
I heard it's amazing.
But
right?
they said that I don't know if they're going to make it. They need to make that.
We're getting a Navigator. We're getting the new Navigators, but not that one.
If they build that you could sell at $100,000. People would buy it.
Probably
People would buy it. It was incredible.
No, I saw the one. I mean, I've seen it online. I go online and look at it. But
it was absolutely incredible, and it was just a nice color. Like, you don't see that kind of color on anything. Okay, it's about like the EcoBoost was.
Yeah, pretty much. Now this let me go around. At this let me go. All right.
Right. Okay.
It's like it's like the MKZ powerful. I mean, it's going to be powerful. Depends what motor you have to get more powerful.
Because we definitely want the best powerful motor, because when you load the cars up, you can feel it.
Yeah,
like,
you'll feel it.
You know, like if you load it up with people, or you load it up with, like if you go on a long drive.
Yeah, you can feel it, definitely.
Oh yeah, it's lovely interior. I like the color. Love that color. And I guess the color options, you'll have a lot more options.
Oh my God, there's a lot, yes. It's totally a lot of options. All different kinds. You know?
This is gorgeous.
I'm looking forward to the Navigator.
You know, I don't.
That's what
you know
I'm
what?
looking forward to,
We have a V8 Navigator, and I think it's a 2010. But the problem was we wanted another V8, and they only made the V6. Now they say that it has more power, but when you tow, you get worse gas mileage. You know, when you tow with it. because it uses more boost
Yeah.
pressure.
What do you guys do? What do you do?
Car service.
Oh, okay.
You know, like
Like
Uber.
an Uber?
Yep.
A lot of the Ubers, you know what a lot of them get? The MKT.
The MKT, you know why? It's a crossover. It's got a lot of headroom. It's got a lot of leg room.
A
Now,
lot of them get that.
when you have a funeral service, the MKT is the best.
Yeah.
But if you're doing like limo,
Yeah,
chauffeur,
right. It's like okay.
you know, if you for what we like cars that look just like this,
Okay.
black cars, you know, nice interiors,
Yeah.
not too nice because you don't want people messing it
No,
up.
they don't.
And you got to keep detailing it.
Yeah, because they normally do that.
But it's really good money. Believe me or not, the cars pay for themselves.
Okay, so
Because in like less than a week, you've
That's
already
it.
made the car payment. In
So
less
it's
than a
actually
week.
worth it.
It is. It really is. That's why a lot of people do it.
Yeah, we get a lot of them.
Yeah.
We get around them, so we get a lot of them, I have to say.
Yep.
Hey, you know what? Money's money, right?
Yeah.
If you can make money doing that, why not?
And you've been to Manhattan.
Yeah.
If you do car servicing between Manhattan and JFK
That's
or
all-
Manhattan and
that's all you need,
LaGuardia,
right?
it
That's
works
all you need.
perfectly. Works perfectly.
That's all you need.
Works absolutely perfect.
It's a nice car. I told you you're gonna like it.
Because I'll tell you, some of the people, $150 for one way to JFK.
yeah.
To JFK,
Alright.
one way, $150.
We're gonna make
Sometimes 200 with the
a
tips.
right. We're gonna make a right, yeah.
Yeah.
So you like it, right? You like the feel.
I
It's
like
nice.
it, yeah.
So
Yeah.
no more MKS. We actually sold our last MKS.
No kidding. So you don't
That's
order
it.
anymore?
We don't
huh?
have no more. They don't make anymore. It's done.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're done with that. Thank God. Now we got new ones coming out.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I'm probably sure you probably noticed the MKS that actually sold the most was just the base model.
Yes.
Because nobody's really racing in these cars. Nobody's.
where they going?
Yeah.
No.
You're just driving it
Yep.
smooth down south, Florida.
Yep. A lot of them do. It's a beautiful car.
Yeah.
It is.
Quiet, very quiet.
We had the one we just sold was the last hybrid we had.
Oh, the last height.
216 hybrid. Yeah. It
Wow.
was a nice one.
Yeah, they're very, very quiet.
Right.
And they're very smooth rides,
Yeah.
very quiet foot. Like the Lincoln cars have great ride quality. They really do.
I used to have a Cadillac. Cadillac.
Which one?
SRX.
Oh yeah, my mom has that.
Yeah.
In fact, I got it for
It's
her.
different. It's different than, Lincoln and Cadillac.
All right.
Now we're just here.
Very, very nice. Let me let this guy know.
Like I said, late, if you want to come back later and speak to any of the salespeople, they're here. They're just doing them. Put a phone. I'll take it.
All right. If you move the car on
Yeah.
back in. Okay. All right.
Look at you. You're feeling this. You're like, this is great.
Yeah. Push reverse. We're going to reverse. It's a really great car. So I already know we're going to end up getting one. The only question is what options we're going to have when we actually get it. But it's a really great car, really great feel. Really great feel. And the women are going to love the luxurious interior. They're going to love it. Headroom could be a little bit better, but other than that, it's fantastic.
If you get the more expensive version of the car, you'll pay closer to $60,000 and possibly even exceed $60,000. But what you'll get is the more advanced front seat and the more advanced rear seat package. As you can see, there is a left and right toggle for the waterfall cushions. Most other cars typically keep the waterfall cushions as one piece, and they usually make it pop in and retract back inwards, so that this way you can give the underside of your thighs a little bit more comfort. The seats also have a mid-back reclining option, and they also have obviously the powered headrest option. And I actually really like these seats. Hopefully what Lincoln will do is put these seats into the MKZ and probably even port these seats into the upper end crossover cars, because ultimately, in my opinion, Lincoln has a better product here than the Cadillac CT6. Despite the fact the CT6 is a rear-wheel drive car and maybe offers a little bit more power, I really like the materials that are in the Lincoln a little bit more. So I'd hope to see that in the future Lincoln cars. Naturally, the other thing that they added was physical controls, such as I already showed you in the MKZ. The physical controls make quickly changing your heating and seat cooling, as well as other functions like the windshield and the rear defroster and the front defogger. It makes changing all of that much simpler. You can't replace a seat knob and a volume knob, so I wish the industry would simply stop trying. This is a lot easier to use than the last models. If I have to level one complaint, it's that the rear seat headroom feels roughly the same as I felt in the CT6. They're both too short, and I wasn't impressed because I couldn't sit straight up. Now, smaller people, such as the people in China that they model a lot of these cars after, won't have this problem, but I was disappointed by rear seat headroom. The legroom is okay in the back, but headroom, having more of it, helps make the case for a car this size. That is part of the reason why people are going to crossovers instead. It's because they get more legroom and they get more headroom because they're sitting straight up. So if they would fix that by making higher headroom space, which I hope they'll do, but I guess they're not going to be able to do it this time around, then they'd have a way better product. What they really need to do is benchmark the S-Class, and they need to benchmark the Hyundai Genesis, because they didn't skimp when they made their rear seat headroom. Shorter people won't have a problem with it, but my issue is there is a buyer market going on right now that is moving towards crossovers simply because they aren't able to get the interior space out of these cars that they want and demand. They want to feel like they have a big car.
Okay. Okay, so they have the split bench, but if you now it's heated and cooled seats, but not the but if you get the recline package, it can't fold down.
No, it doesn't fold down. You just get just the seats, and you get just the same amount of space in the trunk. It just doesn't fold down to put extra stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't go down over there. That's the only difference.
Okay. All right.
And that's the whole spiel.
Okay. Alrighty. Alright, yeah. Looks good. Yeah, this is nice. This is really nice.